This is a Going Back, Remembering UGA interview with Tommy Altman, longtime student activities stalwart and currently semi-retired Associate Director of the university's Office of Special Events. Today is June 6, 2016, and we are visiting in the Oral History Studio in the Special Collections Libraries on the University of Georgia campus in Athens. Chris Lopez is our videographer, and I am Fran Lane. Tommy, thank you for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
Let's start at the beginning. Talk about growing up in Waycross, Georgia, and how in the world you got to Athens.
Well, my father's family were railroading people, and of course the railroad shops are a big part of Waycross, kind of like the way the university is in Athens. And that brought his family there, and that brought him there. And then my mom was from a farming family in Pierce County, so they met and had us kids, my older sister and my younger brother, and I went to school all through, elementary school and then Waycross High School. So all through school, I was always a red and black bulldog. So I always told people,
Waycross.
Yeah. So I always told people I had to go to school here because I already had the clothes for it. So anyway. But when I got to high school, I had two schools. I thought I wanted to go to Emory or to Georgia. Applied to both, and Lord knows what Emory must cost nowadays for what it cost then. But I think I made the right choice because I'm still here after all these years.
It was a good choice for us. Who was one of your biggest influences growing up? One of your greatest influences?
Oh, it was probably my Granny Dixon. Besides obviously my parents, but. She was a very strong lady, and she could cook great, and she just always told great stories about her family and such. So I always thought a lot of her. And then, of course, I think role models as you're getting older in high school were my teachers, some of my teachers there. And Mr. Woodward was a chemistry teacher who sent me to an honors program in chemistry one summer, of all things. Anybody who knows my academics now would, and as they turned out, would wonder about that. But Miss Mary Lane was the English teacher. Doesn't that sound like an English teacher's name?
I think so.
And just some great teachers there. So that's what I thought I wanted to do, was to teach, I think, because those were the role models that I enjoyed being around the most. But when I got to Georgia and started finding out all kinds of other things going on, I ended up not obviously being a school teacher.
It's a great big world out there, and lots of things.
That's
of things. Students now they're aware of it, but back when I was working in the visitor center, they had no idea that there was a turf grass management major, and I mean it just opens up a huge
exactly.
horizon of opportunities.
I ended up being a geography major. And that kind of relates to a teacher that I had. Actually, it relates very much to a high school teacher I had. He came as a football coach, and but he also, as coaches had to teach. And well, it was supposed to be a civics class, but he said, I don't know anything about that. But I was a geography major at Georgia, so I'm going to teach you geography and geology. Probably the best class I really had in high school, and so. As time went on, that's what I ended up majoring in.
Right. Talk about coming to the University of Georgia, to Athens that first time, the physical appearance of campus, what was your reaction?
Well, the first time I came to Athens, I was a senior in high school, and I barely made it into the science fair with a third place, and it got me enough to get me to Athens to come into and I'll just never forget seeing the Coliseum, because it was I think the biggest building I'd ever seen in my life, and set up that display, and then went to see a movie at the Georgia Theater when it was just a movie theater.
Right.
And of all things, it was The Graduate, because that was 1968. So what a great movie to start your college career with. But the next time I was in Athens was at orientation the following summer. And I don't know, I was excited. I was ready to be away from home and to be somewhere else on my own. So I was really excited about it and meeting people. And I lived in Reed Hall, so which was not as elegant as it is now. next to the stadium, though. So it was all really exciting. But I do have to say, after that first fall, because in those days you had to take PE, and the first PE they put you in was like basic training. It was just about wore me out. And I thought Baxter Street was a mountain. Climbing hills and all that. So when I went home for Christmas, I wasn't sure if I was going to come back, to tell you the truth. But I'm glad I did. But I think it was just being around right off the bat, just seeing so many people from different places and meeting people, and I just really, really enjoyed that.
It's an eye-opener for a fella from Waycross who's in the flatlands, the swamplands actually, and coming up to the mountains.
Yeah, that's true. Almost. The only really international people we saw were Canadians going down US 1 to Florida.
Going to Florida. So you were a geography major, but what did you tell me you really majored in?
Well, I really majored in student activities, which is what the Student Center was kind of generally known as in those days. And I got involved in student organizations, particularly the Pandora, the yearbook, and did that all for 4 years, and some in student government, and of course in the University Union Programming Board a bit. And my first job was at the Georgia Museum of Art as a freshman when it was still on North Campus. But I knew I wanted to work at Memorial Hall. Right. So it took me a while to kind of work that out, but I did make it in there and started working for David Fletcher as what they called a floater. So you would float around the building to make sure nothing was getting stolen, I suppose, while the building manager, or the night manager they called him, sat in the office. So there was another job I was wanting to get.
The one that was sitting in the office,
sat in the office, but it changed.
What did you do at the Georgia Museum?
Well, I just assisted the curator in hanging exhibits. I learned how to hang a picture pretty well, so that was pretty cool. Yeah. William Paul was the director then, but Mr. Holbrook was still alive, so he would come in. So
talk about Mr. Holbrook. That's something we've not done before.
Well, he of course donated he and his wife's art collection to the university. I think it was in the 40s.
And it was the center.
And it was the center of what now is the Georgia Museum of Art. And so he still came into his office.
He must have been 100.
Oh God, yeah, he was ancient. He was almost like he was on display. I mean, he was there, and dear old Miss Millie Deering was there, and so that was pretty cool. I never really spoke to him much. He didn't really talk to us much, but he would just come into his office and just to come in. But that was pretty cool, just to be able to know him and see him. But yeah, just did various things. Now I did one thing that was a little mysterious to me. I never understood. There was this big room kind of in the back. It had like windows all around 3 sides, and it was full of giant rubber tree plants that were like 4 feet tall. And I would just have to go dust those. They never got used for anything.
They were real rubber trees?
Yeah. I don't know whatever happened to them, but it was like a forest of rubber tree plants.
Isn't that interesting?
So that always seemed kind of unusual. I think they must have meant to maybe pull them out and use them in the building.
Right, sort of.
We never did while I was there, but we kept them clean and watered.
One of those mysteries.
But anyway, I left that and went to work
as a floater.
As a floater, and then a building manager. And then as time went on, I took just about any job they had because I had to work. And in those days, there's a lot more restrictions, I think, nowadays. But in those days, if somebody wanted to work, they found a place for you
put you on.
And put you on. So I eventually showed movies as a projectionist. I ran the game room. I would be part of the setup crew, to set up for events. And then from there, I went to the next most coveted job, and that was what was called a print boy. And that was working for David Fletcher was the director of what was called the University Union, which was sort of the running of the building. And
I want you to talk about the difference between when it was student activities and when it became the University Union, and kind of why. And
then the Department of Student Activities was sort of on the other side of the building, and they actually did all the sort of logistical things. They took the ID photos and ran the business office and took care of some discipline things. Lots of things now that were spread out in various departments all were in that office. My understanding was, certainly before my time, but even the police department, or what passed for it, was even initially in that office as watchman or something like that, from what Mr. Cox told us. John Cox was the director there at the time. And that was a great job to get because this was before copying machines, so they had offset presses. So that's where Print Boy came from. So you would operate the presses and print letterhead and posters for events and different things. And also that one day a week you'd pull out the ID cameras and set all that up and take ID pictures. It's hard to believe now. There's a full big office that's open all the time. But we just did that one afternoon a week. And as you and I know, it's where we met during those later years when you were with orientation. But then the real fun part of that job was to run spotlights in the Coliseum or in Fine Arts Auditorium when there was a big concert, and to work with those sorts of things. So
I'm going to ask you later, what were the most exciting, interesting, fabulous entertainers you saw in your 40 years? So be thinking on that.
Okay, I will. So the difference between the two was, I think that was it seemed to me, just as an observer, we were always kind of trying to figure out exactly what that was. Because some of the committees, or as they were known as divisions, were in the union, University Union, and it was growing at the time. And there was one called Ideas and Issues who brought speakers. There was an art committee, fine arts committee, that had a small gallery up in Memorial Hall. There was a special events division that Fred Brown was the advisor to, that did big things like homecoming and bridal fairs and international gift bazaar and all kind of
big stuff,
special things. But the concerts and the programming part was over in student activities. So so the two units were merged together, and I'm not exactly sure what drove that, but it sure made a lot of sense, I think, at the time for that to happen. And my recollection is when that happened, then Mr. Cox stayed director, and I believe David became like the associate or assistant director of things. But I do remember we had a lot of fun with it for the first year or two because you had to answer the phone, University Union, Department of Student Activities. And so everybody started putting the slash in it, and to be smarties, but eventually the University Union became just a student organization as it is nowadays, instead of just being known as a department. But everybody referred to Memorial Hall as the Union, and I think called it that a whole lot now, and that's not what the Tate Center is not really known as the Union. If you say that nowadays, that's just, I think, refers to the student organization.
I want to go back and ask you about some of the people that you mentioned that were influences on you, and I want you to talk a little bit about each one, and you started with David Fletcher. Talk about Fletcher a little bit. Who was known as Fletcher? He was known as Fletcher
to everybody, or even David. Just probably one of the kindest giving people I've ever known, and still is to this day. But he also wasn't shy about asking me to do him a favor too, so we were always...
like move 500 chairs from one place to another.
Yeah, move things, different things like that. But we always did it willingly because he was always good. He'd take us out to his house and feed us beans and franks. When you're a poor college student, that free meal was kind of nice. And while you're here, help me move this desk. Well, that was fine. We didn't mind doing it. But he was just a great boss and a great influence for me. Later on, as he moved up into the Student Affairs, VP for Student Affairs office, and started handling issues with people who had maybe a death in the family or whatever, those kinds of counseling type issues. I couldn't think of a better person.
Perfect.
Ever been a better person for that. And he's still that way to this day, and still glad to call him a friend.
Good guy.
Always great to see him.
Mr. John Cox, who was the head of student activities.
He was the head of student activities at the time. Now, at first, he's kind of the director, and he's a little scary as it went. But getting to know him, he was always, again, very, very much caring about what happened to the students that he came in contact with. I think he'd had a long career at the university. I think I kind of knew him. He was getting toward the end of his career as it went. But he always was, I think, handled, I think seeing him kind of I've often thought about my time at the university, maybe I'm jumping the gun a bit, is I got to see kind of how it had been for a long time, and then I got to see lots of changes happen, and he was sort of the way administrators had been for sort of a long time back in those in loco parentis days, kind of. So I think seeing him adjust to some changes that were coming along was kind of interesting to watch as it went.
If you look back at a Pandora from the early 60s, in it they will indicate important administration people. And Tommy, there may be 15.
Yeah.
Whereas 2016, there are hundreds.
Oh, hundreds, hundreds. But then there were, you could put them all in the Pandora.
Right.
And that was part of it.
And Miss Artow and Leanne Sewell and some of those folks. And they all made, I think, together, no matter what their title or where they were, they sort of together made the decisions on how student life would be. Would you?
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, totally. And
of course, there were only how many of us when you started? I think it went to 20,000 the year you came in '68. I think we jumped from 12 to 20.
It was an amazing,
huge jump.
Right in there. It was just you could feel it too, because it was hard to get into classes. Right. It was hard to get anywhere. The bus system was nowhere near like it is nowadays. Yeah. It was old school buses with one door at the front. Everybody had to get off at every stop. And it was just an amazing change in things like that as it happened. But back to that, another person I would need to mention who worked with John was Frank Baird, who was particularly over the work with the concerts, the big concerts and the big programming. It wasn't just popular stuff and rock and roll and those kinds of things. It was also opera singers and the performing arts type things. They were those sorts of things that happen now. There's a whole department for, but those things were student committees at that time. So got to know Frank, and he was another person who was very, very kind to us students who sometimes might need a hand or lend a hand to us or whatever. But
kind of a bear of a man. Did you think he was kind of a big guy?
He could be intimidating until you kind of got to know him. But actually, he was more of a teddy bear.
Absolutely,
to tell you the truth. But
absolutely,
learned an awful lot from him about working with people in show business and working with agents and those sorts of things. He was very good at that. That was probably the best thing he was. And then, of course, back over on the union side, as we kind of called it at the time, was Fred Brown, who I met. I remember when I met him, particularly, it had to do with student government elections and being around all that. He was very involved in that, and that was when we had the big parties. And he was with the United Party, and he actually, I think maybe my sophomore year, somewhere in there is when he actually then went to work full time as advisor with the University Union. And that's when he started. And of course, Fred had such an influence on so many of us who knew him. He was quite a character, but another person who students and folks just really thought a lot of him. And he could be the devil sometimes, but I learned so much from him, and just thankful for all that.
He was a smart.
He did for me too.
Smart fella, and you're right, passionate about.
Oh, if there's anybody that loved, I don't know if there's anybody who ever was beforehand, and there's some wonderful people who love the university, but
passionate about UGA.
He certainly was. He had we called it his tacky coat. It was his red blazer with little bulldog heads all over it that he wore to football games back before such things really even existed. I don't know where he got this thing, found it, but he could get away with wearing it. Nobody else could.
Well, we were lucky with the folks that were here.
Yeah, we really were. I have to say, the other way I knew David Fletcher and Fred was working with the Pandora. David was the advisor. And Fred had also worked with the Pandora for quite a few years, so he still had a hand in that. And he was what now's known as a graphic designer. I think at the time it was more like a commercial artist or whatever. So he really started and took over sort of the print shop area and the graphic area for the union. And at that time they were working to make it more than just, setting some type text that said what the next thing's going to be, but including graphics and such. And of course, that was before computer graphics, so everything was hand done. And just he was a very talented illustrator and such. So then he brought along other graphic designers, Rick Johnson, who then went on to be a great art professor here. Kind of went through that system, and several other graphic designers worked there. And so I never had any of those skills. I wish I did, but it was great being around them.
You mentioned Lyra Spikes.
Oh yeah, Lyra was an advisor for the volunteer group, which was called Communiversity at the time, and then some other areas I forget.
Talk about what Communiversity was.
Well, Communiversity was where students volunteered to help do things in the community, and it could be maybe going and helping mentor students, in the elementary schools, or working with the elderly, those kinds of things. And I know there's still a great volunteer groups that still now are the
service-oriented.
Thanks to spring break. She was one of the first, maybe the first, that I recall, African-American staff people there. And that was, again, part of that change that I saw was during my time in school even. That was pretty amazing. But I always remember her in particular because she helped me with my first resume I ever prepared.
It's a good person to know.
She was really good at that. And I kind of lost track of her. I kind of wish I knew where she was, but I'll never forget her for helping me through that. Because, it's kind of scary when you're first starting out.
Absolutely. You mentioned Roger Dance in your notes.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know him really personally when I was a student, but from a distance and being with the Pandora, we're covering, the events of the years. And so I just thought he was such a brave person to deal with the situation of the name of the band, which was the Dixie Redcoat Band. And I think, again, as we're dealing with more African American students and such being here and sensitivities, he took it upon himself to say we need to remove that from our name. And evidently it hadn't always been part of the name. I'm not sure about that history, but he just got really hammered and beat up one side and down the other. I remember in Pandora we had a picture of him hanging in effigy from a tree out behind Reed Hall, but he stood his ground. And then later on, as I got to know him, when I started working on working with him as a staff member with different things where we might interact with the band, he just was the kindest, gentlest person ever. To think that he did the right thing. But I think he set a great example to young people. He certainly did for me at that time. You
were right. Last but not least, Tom Cochran.
Well, yeah, Tom Cochran came along a little bit later in the time when I had been working there for just a year or two. And he became the business manager and of all of student activities at first, but then he was moved up the hill to the VP for Student Affairs office to be over finances for all of student affairs, which he did through his retirement. But just became he and his whole family really got to know him and salt of the earth, and I think of him as one of my best friends. You just know he's going to be there if you need you, but for anything. But he's that way with just everybody. He's just an amazing person. He certainly gave me good advice and such in trying to deal with finances when you're a broke student, young person, and dealing with things like that. But more than that, he was a good person to talk to when you're trying to
He was a minister, was he not?
He was a minister before. That was education, but then and I don't really know the motivation, but he decided to come back and get his accounting degrees at Georgia. But he always kept his hand and still does have his hand in the ministry as a lay minister. Yeah. He actually served as a minister full-time for a bit in his church, but he's still, I can't even tell you anymore how many weddings and
I bet.
funerals even that I've been to that he's officiated at, and whenever he gives a prayer, it still gives me a chill to hear him. He's got a great way with reassuring people. So I think that served him well as he became, in
his job,
student affairs, But probably the thing he's known most for, and I think what a legacy to leave, he founded the Arch Society, which feels like it's always been here. But I was actually with him when he kind of came up with that idea, so that's one of my claims to fame, that I heard him say we should have that. We had gone to Auburn for a Better Relations trip. We had started those with Auburn when there were some issues with treatments, with how fans were behaving at each school. So that's become, it still is a big trip that goes on now, where each year the school hosting the home football game hosts the other school.
Right.
And Auburn brings bus loads. We might bring van loads, but either way, it's really found good bonds where we've had more in common than just the fact that we're opponents for one afternoon a year. But while we were there on that trip, their equivalent group to the Arch Society, they're called the War Eagle Girls and the Plainsmen or something like that, wearing these gosh awful orange blazers. But they were hosts and hostesses, and they were just so nice. I mean, it was really very impressive. I mean, they treated us just like royalty while we were there, and they always do when we go there. So we were driving back in the van, and he said, we need a group like that. We need to come up with that. And before the next year was out, he had started it and found a way to make it happen and came up with the people in it. And it's grown into, a group that's really essential, I think, certainly to the office I'm in now, the Special Events Office. We use their services. They're great ambassadors. And I think when you take them and the Visitor Center students and maybe the orientation leaders, all those together are some of the people who students and the public in general see, right? Our initial contacts are true ambassadors, universities. So I think that's just been a great legacy that
a great bunch of young people, and it was always fun to work with them. And, and just a pleasure.
Oh yeah, and they don't have tacky orange blazers. Thank goodness one of our school colors is black. So
anybody hearing this is going to think we are seeing through rose-colored glasses, but I think everything you said, absolutely.
Well, I just been so fortunate. I really am grateful to have had such good people that I've got to know through, I guess you could say work or school relationships, the people that have become just great friends and over the years.
We'll try to find somebody you can raise your eyebrows about. How about that?
We could probably go on with this of that.
Go back. You said you lived your first year in Reed Hall, right?
I did.
And for reasons of that experience, you lived other places the next 3. Is that right?
We were there. Stayed there the following fall. Okay. But then by that winter quarter of I guess that was '69. Had found an apartment off campus, and that's where I started rooming with Tom Landrum and some other guys, and so you lived off campus after that, all over the place. Oh, geez.
All over Clark County, huh?
All over Clark County.
Talk about women's rules for a minute. Do you remember what that situation was about 67, 68?
Sure, that was all in effect my freshman year. For women, there was a curfew. Obviously, the dorms were segregated. You could only bring in the opposite sex on certain days. You had certain,
and then not on every hall.
And then it wasn't on every hall. Right. It was just certain ones. Women supposedly weren't supposed to wear gym shorts or anything. They had to wear an overcoat over it or raincoat over it or something. And something about smoking. Just all kinds of real, what now seem silly rules for ladies, to be ladylike and that type thing. For men, though, the opposite of that, even though we didn't have curfews, but if you were a male, you had to take ROTC for your first 2 years. And so I was in Air Force, so that was my military service, I guess you could say, for that year. And then but over the course of the summer, it just turned completely upside down, and all that went away. It changed. Men didn't have to be in ROTC, and all those, the women's curfew rules and all those strict things that just applied to women, went away.
Right.
And
in loco parentis sort of spiraled on out. Yeah.
Kind of spiraled on out. Judicial was programs was still on its sort of fledgling early times. That's another area that's grown amazingly now since then. But it was a transition time. But that was an amazing change to be here and see. It was just like flipping a switch.
Day and night, wasn't it?
It was amazing, yeah.
I would agree.
Most of us were happy not to have to be in ROTC. I guess the only one good thing about it, the instructors and everybody were real nice and all, but it counted, for men though, that was, you had to take it and you had to pass it because it counted as part of your average, which is kind of interesting. And but that was the time guys were starting to grow their hair long, so they'd have to tuck their hair up under their cap for drill days. So those were kind of things guys didn't miss too much.
I'd forgotten about the hair.
Oh, yeah. I've forgotten about hair a long time ago myself.
How did you get around?
Well, as freshmen, that was another thing. You couldn't have a vehicle, supposedly. But one of our friends, he was sort of the operator of the group, Monty Ayers. He somehow had a car, and he would park it up on Baxter Street there by the kind of across from where old Bolton Hall used to be.
Right.
And so we would walk up to that car from Reed Hall and get in it and drive up 2 blocks to the Crystal, just so we could feel like we went somewhere. But but folks from home would come pick you up, or I'd get a ride back home with somebody who was an older upperclassman who I might know, that type thing. But then my sophomore year, I was able to bring the family sedan. The old family sedan came back with me. So when we moved off campus, that's what I contributed, were the wheels.
Oh man, you were a popular guy.
And then we had another guy. He supposedly was going to be the cook, and so he took money from us to buy the food. We realized later we probably should have done better accounting, but that's another story. But so there wasn't much. The bus system wasn't much of a bus system to speak of. Of course, campus wasn't quite as spread out, but it was still a long haul from Moore Hall, from a language lab, to get when they built that new outer hole hallway out there in the middle of nowhere. It felt like. So that was quite a haul to make.
Agreed. Where did you eat? Did you eat? So you had a cook.
Well, in Reed Hall, we ate in the old Bulldog room a lot at Memorial Hall. I never did do the meal plan thing. I ate occasionally in a dining hall, but it was
different from the way it is now.
It was very different than the wonderful food they have now. I mean, now it's pretty nice.
Oh, it is.
It's pretty sumptuous, but it wasn't quite the same then. But there were boarding houses all around, and in downtown were all these meat and 3 restaurants and places like that. And you could eat at the Baptist Student Center for 35 cents. That was a pretty good deal for lunch. And they just found places like that. If you had a couple
of dollars, you could get a.
Oh yeah. So I don't remember losing weight.
The freshman 15.
Yeah.
Fashionable male attire in 1968, 1969, 1970.
God. Oh, that should be forgotten.
It was not a beautiful time.
It wasn't a pretty sight, But as we started wearing bell bottoms and fake, you wanted to have a leather jacket, but who could afford that? So it was like Naugahyde, fake vinyl jackets, and even platform shoes for guys. Remember those awful things? Some pretty hideous stuff.
Long hair.
Long hair. Now in '68, and initially then though, everything was still very conservative. If you look at the yearbooks, you can kind of see that. But it really, very quickly, the styles that were in other parts of the country were always slow to get here. But then when they got here, they kind of hit pretty well. So, long hair and little glasses, little John Lennon glasses, and I always used to say I realized it was time to cut my hair when I realized I looked more like Ben Franklin than with my head getting bald. But I had a pair of favorite bell bottoms, and you had patches on them, and you would put patches on them. They weren't covering holes or anything, but that's just patches you wore there on your pants. And then I think kids later, when they started carrying these backpacks around, I don't know what we carried all our stuff in, but we sure didn't have backpacks.
No.
I don't know. I think we just carried stuff. I don't really recall that. But and then shirts for guys with big old collars. You know, collars would stick way out like to here. You know, so it was just hippie stuff, beads. A lot of. I never was a bead person.
You said that you were a clean hippie.
I was a clean hippie. I didn't like to be dirty. I remember going to a bluegrass festival where it was one of those 3-day things without a place for a shower.
Oh gosh.
I said I can't do that anymore. I got to have my.
So you didn't go to Woodstock?
No, I didn't do the Woodstock thing. Know somebody who did, but
can't imagine.
You know, really, I don't remember Woodstock being a thing till after it was all over, and you heard about it in the movie. You know, obviously because it was up north and all that. I think for here it was the thing down at Byron that everybody wanted to go to, but I didn't. I didn't do that. I got enough of all that though as I started working with all the concerts and through all the music stuff through the time being around those hazy days.
All right. You talk about the campus climate at the time.
Well,
we had Vietnam.
I think for guys, the threat of being
the draft,
being really afraid until you're facing that. That's why to me I've always found it kind of interesting in politics. All these years later, when people on either side would talk about what somebody did to kind of get out of it, because in those days, pretty much everybody, as sentiment against the war came along, most people were like, "Well, do whatever you need to do," but it was scary. Mm-hmm. It was very frightening to think, what might happen, because the war seemed to be something that we just seemed to be getting, in my opinion, in a quagmire, and it was just. It was just real scary, and so I came to school on I look at it now and realize it really probably wasn't fair, but it was a college deferment, so I took it and came, and then the lottery came along, and my number was never called, so that's kind of what happened with me. I knew people who were. Vietnam vets who came back and were very strongly, in the anti-war movement. And I knew people, though, who also went and served. So it was a just strange mixture
days,
of emotions and being pulled all over the place and going. But when the Kent State shootings happened, that certainly hit every campus, I think, and it certainly hit here. And we'd had some smaller little protests and different sit-ins and things like that, but that's really the big one that hit, that happened, and that we covered in the Pandora, I think, pretty well when you look at it. But
talk about that day.
Well, when you heard about the shootings in the news, now news was more in those days. It was more like something you'd hear on the radio, more so than that was sort of the social media, even quicker than you would hear on television. But as the news spread about that, it was frightening. We had already had some, I don't know which came first, but I do recall civil rights protests also that involved the National Guard being called out. So had seen National Guard called out on protests before, so just really kind of scared what's going to happen with that and hoping it doesn't get violent or anything. We were fortunate to have dear old Dean Tate. He just got right out in the middle of it, and if you take a look at the pictures in the yearbook, you see him there, and he's wearing his love beads and all this and that. But he's out with the students. He says, "I'll stay out here with you as long as you want to stay." And I think his presence really kept things peaceful.
Was it a gathering at the president's home? Is that
well,
what happened?
It started
in North Campus.
It started like up around the academic building on North Campus, and then it ended up. Let's go talk to the president.
Yeah. And there were hundreds.
Hundreds, yeah. There were hundreds, and so they walked and that's dangerous, kind of getting off campus.
Right.
I think. But anyway, so they blocked Prince Avenue and sat out in front of the president's house. I honestly can't remember if President Davison spoke to them or not. I really don't remember too much about that. It seemed, though, after that, and then working down at Memorial Hall where the plaza was, where people could protest, and that was sort of the area for that, there were always things going on, people with tables and or organized things, anti-war, some plus for war, for the support of the veterans. I think it always seemed to me kind of tough to think about, because you hear about veterans from the Vietnam War talking about coming back and not feeling appreciated and such. I personally never saw that, but that doesn't mean it didn't happen. I think I was in kind of an isolated world here, kind of with that. But from what I heard from veterans who came back and then came on to school, it just scared me even more. It was a frightening thing to think about having to possibly go. But anyway, that's kind of what happened. But it was just the tension. Just back to your question, the tension just really built. So you just weren't sure what was going to happen, and I think there was a fear that oh God, the guard's coming, because what might be happening. At the same time, civil rights protests were going on, particularly as involving voting rights. And there was also a march that started at Ebenezer Church over off Broad Street, there behind the Varsity. So we went, Tom Landrum and Fred Brown and I went to kind of cover it for the yearbook. We were curious too. Mm-hmm. And went to the church, but there were people on top of all the buildings around there. They were going to march on that street from Ebenezer down to the courthouse. Well, we went and started watching it, and then the National Guard was there in the Varsity parking lot, and they're starting to shoot pepper gas, and so that was really scary. So that sent people scurrying and running. Now, a funny aside with that, though, was that's a barbecue place or something now, but it was a Kentucky Fried Chicken place at the time, and I think the manager was upset that all these people were on his property watching that going on. So I remember looking over, and Fred's up on top of one of the outside tables taking pictures, and Landry's running around the table chasing the manager who's trying to get Fred off the table. But that kind of puts a little levity in what really, though, was a scary situation. It was about the only time I'd seen that. But that was the kind of stuff that was going on, and there were marches and protests and rallies and things like that all the time.
And we had a fairly strong black student union at the time.
Very strong. That was coming along in terms of and I think those were the kinds of things that brought them out. And there were definitely people on both sides of the issue.
Absolutely. And sure. I think Robert Benham, who later became the Chief Justice of the State Supreme Court, was the president of the BSU at the time. That is Black Student Union,
right.
Not the Baptist.
Right.
And it was just a terrific time of transition and change.
So much going on in the country, and it definitely reached Georgia, even though in many ways we kind of were not always on the cutting edge of things or whatever, a little bit, but what was happening in the country definitely affected what was happening here. And you couldn't help it. And then you would have teachers, professors sometimes who might be involved one way or the other, and so that kind of added to the mix a little bit here and there. But the University Union actually ended up being, with some of the programming they brought, whether it was speakers or musicians or whatever, brought people in, and so some of those people also would be very strident in what their views were on things too, whether it was civil rights or the war, whatever. So that kind of added to the whole mix too.
Interesting times.
Oh yeah.
All right. How did you initially make your connection with the Student Activities Department? It was when you joined the Pandora staff, right?
Yeah, the first thing I did as a freshman was I'd done high school yearbooks, so I was a yearbook nerd, so I wanted to continue here, so I went up to the Pandora office and I met the folks there, actually. Susan Brown, who's now Tom Landrum's wife, Susan Landrum. I always called her my first friend I ever met at Georgia, really, though, because we always just got along good and talked a lot, and remember being welcomed up there. And when you're a freshman, you're kind of a flunky on any organization like that, so that's part of what it was, but I enjoyed it very much. And so that's really what drew me to Memorial Hall, first of all. And I did that for 4 years.
And you just stayed.
Yeah, then I just stayed.
I was going to talk about things. What it appeared to me from your resume that your responsibilities just, like chewing chicken livers, they just kept growing.
Yeah.
You just
the
expanding your
well,
territory.
what happened, I came along at a time where things were growing and things were happening. So my first full-time position was the first one they had established that way, and that was a person who was to handle the technical aspects of all these programs and such. So I would handle the lighting and the sound and the staging, the production, as it's known nowadays, of the various events, whether it was a big concert in the Coliseum or maybe one on Legion Field or whatever. But I had learned how to do all that from working with people like Frank Baird and Fred Brown and others through my years as a student and as I was first beginning. So I kind of worked out. Frank left, and the time worked out. They needed somebody who kind of knew where everything was. So I just hung around till they hired me. And but I also did I did IDs once a week, and that initial year I printed once a week. So I did a little bit of everything I'd done as a student in a transitional kind of thing. And now, of course, all those things have grown very much. But the main focus was the production stuff, and I did that for about 7 or 8 years, and then I moved more into administration over that area, because you get a little burned out. The hours on that are really, really pretty rough. So,
well, talk about the year that the new Tate Center came online, and how. Let's start in the beginning about how we got a new student center, and it was the Tate Center. What
happened on that, and that's something Fred Brown really led a good bit, I think, as a staff person. Maybe a little bit behind the scenes even a bit, but there were lots of student university union presidents who really got behind it. Names that come to mind: Melita Easter and Tommy Milo and Melinda Ferris. We knew we needed we needed more space. We love Memorial Hall, but the student body was growing, and we knew we needed one. And so a movement started really through the University Union, and then they kind of got SGA involved to start pushing.
Fomenting.
Exactly. Well, we had learned all that through all the protest times. So, came up with things. So they came up with cute things to do. So they had a fake groundbreaking one day, hit the news, and different things like that. And remember, I still have my Let's Break Ground button that we all wore. And people would ask us what that is, and so we're waiting to break ground on the new Student Center. But eventually, through the help of the staff at Student Activities at the time, but also through Bob Argo, the representative, funding was secured through the state legislature to get the Phase 1, as it's now called, of the Tate Center started. And it started in the late 70s, but it took. While it was being built, there was some issues with the construction companies, and they switched companies, so it ended up opening in '83, about 2 or 3 years later than it had initially planned, and we opened it actually in phases. It wasn't all finished when we moved in, but that was a lot of fun to be around. So we started, but we never did completely move out of Memorial Hall, because by that time the new building wasn't big enough for us all to fit in. So Memorial Hall still stayed integral as part of the student union, and some departments stayed over there. And I think it's kind of amazing to walk through Memorial Hall now and see how grand it is, and go, why couldn't we have done that when we were there? But it's beautiful now. I think my heart will always still be in Memorial Hall. But I was proud to be part of the moving in and the setting up of the Tate Center. And I think naming it for Dean Tate, I mean, it couldn't have been anything
perfect.
otherwise for that. So now I think it's another thing, when you get something after a while and after it's been here for a while. I always like to say if we do something for 2 years, it's a tradition.
That's right.
And if it's 3 years, we've always done it that way. Well, it feels like, sometimes with students, I would talk about current students, who even, freshmen coming in now, the whole big, the phase 2 of the Tate Center, that's all
old hat.
Old hat. That's been there forever. So it is kind of interesting. And even as you never have enough of what you're going for. But there was a lot of people who really had to move to get that started and to get it going. And then to get phase 2, it almost started immediately because it wasn't big enough initially, and we knew it wasn't, to take care of the needs of a growing student body and of the different services that people were asking for. And I think that's changed. If you walk through there now and you see food courts and other retail kinds of things going on that we couldn't have even imagined from when we just had the old Bulldog room.
It's fabulous.
Of course, the Ugga Burger was pretty good.
In 2005, you left the Division of Student Affairs, sort of, and moved to the Office of the, I have to get the name right, Office of Special Events as Associate Director.
I did, yes. I had been in about 30 years down in student activities, and I don't know, after 30 years or so, you need to do something different. But no, I had a great opportunity come along to move to Special Events Office. At that time, more things were being consolidated under Dr. Adams at that time into what now is the Office of Special Events. We'd had an Office of Special Events for some time, handling things mainly for the president and some development things, but as more development and fundraising things happening, more events happening. But what I brought with me when I moved were my duties working with Commencement and Honors Day in terms of production, because I had always done that. They had always been housed in Student Affairs, but I brought those with me when I moved over to what then was called External Affairs. And so all those things now are housed with us. And so I particularly focused on logistics for Commencement. And as we moved to make the big changes in Commencement to a nighttime event in the spring and added fireworks and lots of other show business type things to it. But our student body has grown. This past Commencement, we had 52 seats on the field for graduates, and that's how many graduates were there, and they almost all were full. We probably had 50,000 people in the stands, so that's a pretty big event. And but we run it like we used to just run an old rock show or something in many ways as far as the production of it. So that was kind of one of my things. But then I got to learn a lot of other things in working with all the staff at Special Events, all the ladies there, about decor. I'd never said decor in my life before I moved there. Fluff and menus and those kinds of things. So I've learned a lot, but I've enjoyed it. It was a great opportunity for me to still do things I like doing. I kind of went full circle getting back into production from what I started doing. And so did that till I had kind of reached that ceiling of 40 years service, and you're kind of I wasn't really ready to quit working, but I was kind of working for nothing. So fortunately, they've had me back as a retiree rehire. So I still work Commencement and other production and other events that come along.
We just can't let you go.
Yeah, as long as they want me, I'm enjoying it very much.
What an amazing perspective when you can look back over 40 years, Tommy, at the things that have happened here. Talk about the 3 or 4 things that were, in your view, the things that were some of the most important things that ever happened on our campus.
Oh, wow. Well, I think for me to be able to see some of the civil rights protests and some of those real issues, those were the things that were going on as I was a student. And then as the time went by, of course, Hunter and Holmes had that was before my time, but then as time went by, being able to meet them and to see them come back to the university and be a part of the university as alum, when you realize how terrible they were treated.
Right.
That always just really moved me. And then when we did the 50th anniversary, was very involved in that 3-day event, and it just really moved me an awful lot. It meant a lot, to me, to have seen that and to feel like you were part of that history. There's still a lot of things that obviously need to be dealt with and worked on, but I think there's been a lot of progress in those sorts of things. I think the other thing with the university to see is how, I wonder sometimes if I would have gotten, I think a lot of us wonder if we could even get in now, to see the increase in quality or whatever of our students overall has just been amazing to me to see that. I marvel at commencement when somebody's standing there and they've got not one, not two,
three
degrees, plus a master's or working on a doctorate. I mean, this is at an undergraduate commencement. It's amazing, and that's it's just so incredible to me to see that happening. And I think along with that is to see just the size of the campus growing as it expands out to East Campus. That's where we used to have tractor pulls.
Right.
And it's just there and across the state, really. That's what I've enjoyed in special events, is being able to do events at facilities across the state, groundbreakings and dedications, and to see that impact. I think I never really appreciated that quite so much before, how much of an impact the university has across the state. And
as a land-grant institution, that was our charge.
As our charge,
get out there.
We definitely are doing that. And it's many things are in agriculture and those sorts of things, and those sciences, but also in other ways too. But just to see the growth has just been amazing. I'd be wrong if I didn't say I don't enjoy athletics and the things that happen there too, and to see that growth and to work with some of those things. I've been able to work with the gymnastics program since the 90s, doing their production for when the team runs out, and that's kind of a fun thing to do.
Disney World.
And just come to appreciate that and to be part of those, be around those young folks. That's just those are more people that to me are amazing in how they do all that, and still we're proud of gymnastics this year because they won the bronze academic dog or whatever it is for the team with the highest GPA. But I don't know, I've just been real lucky, real fortunate.
Amazing students, and I think that's
just seeing all that.
Talk about, and you've talked about events. What are the most unforgettable entertainment or performance or?
Well, I've had quite a few over the years of different kinds of things, from everything from obviously just about every major act that toured came through here from the 60s into the early 80s. Before the Coliseum basically just became obsolete in terms of being able to handle programs. They built the Omni in Atlanta, and we became Atlanta's market. Well, they've torn the Omni down and built Phillips Arena, and now they're tearing down, and the Georgia Dome, and they're tearing down the Dome. We still have the old Coliseum, which was built for 8,000 students maybe. And you just can't use it to fit in concerts particularly. You can do Union's starting to do some mid-sized things again, I'm glad to see. But wow, I never would have thought, just from times when I was running spotlights, but then when I started stage managing and doing that, to meet people like, getting hugged by Dolly Parton was a treat at the time. She was sweet. Bob Hope was, somebody we kind of grew up with knowing, and who, getting to meet him and be in his backstage room with him, and him pumping me for information about Athens and UGA, and then to hear him go out and make jokes using the things I gave him. That was pretty cool. Another time when Secretary Rusk was here and teaching and with the Rusk Center, and he arranged for Henry Kissinger to come speak. So I was stage managing that, so to have Secretary Rusk introduce me to Secretary Kissinger in the dressing room was pretty cool. I didn't ask them about the wars or anything. I had a few thoughts about it, but I didn't think they'd want to hear. But I had lots of different entertainers over the years. Some of them you got to be real close to. You kind of found out that some people you thought their public persona was kind of warm and fuzzy. That's not how they were necessarily. And others who were kind of harsh and all, but backstage or whatever, they were the nicest people ever. So, I got to meet a lot of good folks and in the entertainment world. But you pretty much left them alone unless they spoke to you. That's kind of how it worked.
What was your favorite show?
Oh, wow. Well, William Wyndham is an actor, and he did Thurber, a one-man show of Thurber.
James Thurber.
And that might seem kind of odd. Maybe you'd think I'd say something like, Jethro Tull or
I loved Thurber.
Or Elton John or Linda. Well, Linda Ronstadt was pretty good.
I was getting ready to say.
I have to admit, can't forget that one. But it just depended on the particular type of thing, area you're looking at. I mean, a lot of favorites, but we had a group called the Mission Mountain Wood Band we brought every year, and it was a bunch of old hippies in an old Greyhound bus they had converted to travel around in out on Legion Field, and it was the most fun ever, so lots of good shows. Did Bonnie Raitt on Legion Field. That was a great show. So just kind of on and on.
I think you had too good of a time.
I probably did.
So Mr. Kissinger might be the most influential
in the world of
didn't we have
Gorbachev.
I was getting ready
meeting
to say.
him. That's kind of forgotten about that. Yeah, he was nice. He was very nice. His daughter was nice too. His whole family was with him. They were very nice. Yeah, kind of forgotten about that one. We filled the Coliseum for that one.
I bet. I was there.
I think when you look at we've had everyone from those folks to I remember Jesse Jackson.
I was going to say that was quite a
Alice Walker, who just spoke this past year again, but one of the very first charter lectures that Carol Winthrop set up, she spoke at when The Color Purple had just come out, and I think she certainly just lots of folks like that, and there are a lot of folks who Betty Friedan, I didn't know who she was. Now I've come to appreciate, her work and everything, and women's issues. I was driving her around. She was just real nice. She seemed kind of like Granny. The truth, real sweet lady. When you look at in show business, again, we through just amazing the acts when you put together a list for the 40th and then the 50th anniversary of the Stegman Coliseum of all the shows, and it's pretty impressive when you look at it over those years of the people who appeared in the Coliseum, and if they were a big name, just about all of them came here for the most part. The Eagles didn't come. They were supposed to come, but they canceled the week before. But we still had T-shirts that said the Eagles at the University of Georgia, so we acted like they came.
How much has the world changed at the University of Georgia in the last 40 years? And the students, you've talked about the extreme, the difference in terms of their seriousness and their intellect. Talk about how the student body has changed, and then how student affairs has had to change to deal with that.
Well, I think students are much more worldly. There's it amazes me in our special events office, we have some student employees, and I think just practically every one of them does travel abroad, study abroad. I think it's made our student body more worldly, more part of the world. I think when I started, we were kind of insular, and I do remember my first roommate. I just was assigned a roommate, and he was a fellow from India, and my daddy was dropping me off, and I'm not sure what he ever thought of that. you know, to tell you the truth, he didn't really say anything. I was fine with it. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. The guy from India, but nowadays it's, you know, there's just, students are much more liable to be off to Bulgaria or somewhere, Costa Rica, one of our, you know, we have all these university campuses, Cortona and Oxford, and those kinds of places. So I think that's a major change, and I think students are much more involved in what's happening, not just in the state, but in the world. And I think that is pretty important, I think. And I think it means when you look at some of the effects that some of our faculty have, and therefore then our students have, things they're involved in, whether it's the lady who was the faculty who was dealing with the oil spill stuff. Just look at the Georgia every day and how people are quoted about things. It's just pretty remarkable. And so our students are then brought along for that ride with them. So I think, to my mind, that's the biggest change. Certainly you look at physically in the buildings and all the things that go along with it, but it's the people and how they've changed, I think, that are the biggest thing that I've seen. Student affairs, I think, to get back to your question about that, of course I've been out of it for a while, but I think heart's still it. I think there's still that struggle and issue of dealing with young people who are just becoming adults. And I think those issues haven't changed at all, a bit though. And I think they still have to contend with some of those, whether it's discipline or trying to find ways to help people channel their things that they want to participate in or do to do good. So I think those basic student affairs things really haven't changed all that much since we left in loco parentis and kind of went into things now. There's still some of the same issues that you still see popping up. Some of them aren't too good, things that happen occasionally. Unfortunately, the bad things sometimes get more press than the good things. But overall, I think it's still, you know, people, you have to just have good people who like working with people in that field.
A wonderful point. What have we missed that we still need to talk about?
Oh, my goodness. Well,
I'm going to cough on you.
Oh, you go right ahead. I don't know. I think I feel like we've kind of hit everything. I do have fond memories of you.
Oh, so glad to hear that.
When you and I started work together in orientation, and I enjoyed that because orientation is sort of the bookend to commencement, because it's a happy time too, and because everybody's happy and they're coming and they haven't failed anything yet or done this or that. And then commencement's the opposite. They made it through. One reason I enjoy commencement so much, because it's what we're all about here.
2 happy occasions.
2 happy occasions for sure.
Great. Tommy, back around the turn of the century, meaning 2000, not 1900, for those of us who still think that's what we mean, you were named the Division of Student Affairs Unsung Hero, and the citation you received read in part, Altman has worked diligently to develop and promote relationships among the division and the rest of the campus. He has been a mentor and role model to the people who work for him, and he has done so quietly, never seeking recognition of fanfare. And those of us who've known you and worked with you over the years would certainly say amen to that. And today, we would like to sing the praises of unsung hero Tommy Altman. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.